I've written about this, but I experienced it before. For about 10 years, I suddenly got an urge, a very powerful urge, to take up whitewater paddling. And for those who don't know, that's paddling in a canoe or a kayak down through rapids in rivers. And so it's a pretty exciting time. I'd spent my earlier life in sailboats, and my father was a great sailor, so I knew about the ocean and sailing, but I had never done any river work except going down the Grand Canyon on a raft, which was pretty exciting too. But anyway, the point is, when I did this for about 8 or 10 years, and then it was over. I just got the sense that it was time to stop, and I was sitting in my living room. There was nothing went wrong. Nobody got upset or angry or anything. It was a wonderful, wonderful group of people that I got to know and so forth. But I was sitting in my living room thinking, what was all that about? And suddenly I realized that if you want to stay in your boat, which is a metaphor for stay on track, stay alive in your body and so forth, many ways to look at that. But if you want to stay in your boat, it's important to keep what's directly in front of you, what's right in front of you in focus. Be aware of what's in front of you, as well as what's in the middle distance, as well as what's further downstream. And you have to keep all that, very much be aware of all of that at once. Otherwise, you're out of your boat. And which isn't not the end of the world, but you're off. You have to regather yourself and get back on your boat and so forth. So I thought about that in terms of living a life, in terms of staying, so that you felt you were on a path that had some meaning, and I keep thinking of that every now and then, because I think it's not easy to always know if we're going in the right direction, or if we're following something that is some of value, or what we want to be doing. There's so much out there, and so I thought, I keep thinking about that. And in terms of my life today, which of course is very different, I no longer do whitewater paddling, but I still have the metaphor of being aware of what's immediately in front in terms of time and activity and so on, and what's just in the near distance, and then the farther along, and how that all constantly changes. So what's right in front of you is behind you before you know it, and then on and on and on. So it's a matter of being very much in the present, as well as being aware of what's coming. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but it's been something important for me to keep in touch with.
Thank you, Jane. So as we go for our one-sentence reflections here, I want to invite you to connect that up with your own experiences in the deep dive, if that's something you can do. I'll start, because I have a direct connection to that. The person I first heard talk about that is Mark Dubois, who's a river rafter. And he talked about the through line. And if you're in a class 5, the tough class, whatever the highest level of rapids is that you can actually transverse, that isn't deadly, maybe it's class 4, class 5 is impossible. And he says this is a metaphor for humanity right now. We're in a class 4 rapids. There's a way through, but there's only one way through. And if you look at all away from the through line, you're gone. And so that was his metaphor for how we make it. And he was at the Climate Change and Consciousness Conference. I knew him going back to the Pachamama Alliance's 4 Years Ago campaign, which is how I met Sharon Joy Kleitch, who was here. And that led to Occupy Cafe, which connected me to others. So, and he was also at the New Story Summit, which was kind of the predecessor to Climate Change and Consciousness. And the last thing I'll say, I know this is way more than one sentence, but none of this happens without this particular deep dive, without Climate Change and Consciousness. There were 4 other conferences that we were weaving together, and our conference weaving initiative was going well before we connected up with Stephanie Mines and CCC 19. But her work in particular, her vision for a post-conference, pre and post-conference engagement, and her commitment to supporting that financially, in addition to with incredible devotion to inviting people to show up, launched this with critical mass from the beginning. So even though there's a majority of us now don't have a direct connection to CCC 19, but without that seeding of the connecting field, all of this wouldn't have happened. So to me, it's a beautiful validation of the idea we had of using conferences as a way, as an energy source. And we can trace it back to Mark and shooting the rapids.
So just in response to what Jane and Ben just said, the only time I've ever been in a kayak in class 4 or 5 rapids was the summer of Enron, when all kinds of water mayhem was happening in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I was in a double kayak. I don't know, maybe I was in my own. Anyways, the first time I'd ever done any river rafting with someone that Mark knows. And I got bumped out of my boat, Jane. And the kayaks went away. The person I was with, his head went under the water in the rapids, and then I never saw it again. And here I was in this canyon in these rapids, bumped out of my boat, and wanting to kill the person who, took me on this introductory ride in class 4 or 5 rapids. So, and then that led me to that Hopi poem about, our heads bobbing in and out of the river. And, your head bobs up, and the people you see around you, we are the ones we've been looking for. So I'm not in a boat right now. I've been bumped out of a boat, and now I'm looking for whose heads are bopping up out of the rapids, and going, okay, here we are. Let's just stay together in these rapids as best we can, and maybe we will land somewhere together, and be able to take a deep breath. And go, wow, still alive on planet Earth. Now what?